She watched her husband's fingers curl around another woman's hand across the candlelit table, the gesture slow and deliberate, like he wanted her to see it, like he needed her to feel the weight of it. The restaurant hummed with soft piano music and the quiet murmur of expensive conversations, but in that moment, all Lauren could hear was the blood rushing in her ears. 18 years of marriage, and it had come to this, a public execution disguised as dinner. But then something happened that her husband didn't expect. The waiter, a tall man in his mid-40s with careful eyes, passed by their table and caught Lauren's gaze. Just for a second. And he nodded, barely perceptible, just a slight dip of his chin. That was the moment Lauren knew the humiliation was intentional and that her insurance policy was already in place. Her husband, Richard, thought tonight would break her, thought she'd cry or make a scene or beg. He didn't know someone at the table was listening for her. He didn't know that every word he said, every arrogant laugh, every cruel comment was being recorded by the man refilling their water glasses. And he certainly didn't know that the woman sitting across from him had spent 3 months preparing for this exact moment. And before we go any further, if stories like this give you comfort, perspective, or even a little hope, you're in the right place. Go ahead and join our story family by tapping subscribe. We'd truly love to have you here. How does a marriage of nearly 2 decades end up at a table like this? How does a man who once promised to love and protect someone decide instead to publicly destroy her? And who was the woman sitting beside him, smiling like she'd already won? More importantly, who was the waiter? Why was he helping Lauren? What evidence was being collected in real time while Richard performed his carefully rehearsed betrayal? These questions matter because what happened that night wasn't just about a failed marriage, it was about power, control. And what happens when someone underestimates the quiet strength of a woman who's been watching, learning, and planning? The wine glasses caught the light. Phones buzzed silently on the table. The waiter moved through the room with practiced ease, his presence so ordinary that Richard never looked at him twice. And that was exactly the point. To understand how this dinner became a quiet battlefield, you have to understand who Lauren used to be, and more importantly, who she'd become. Lauren Mitchell was 43 years old, a former compliance officer at a mid-sized financial firm, and the kind of woman people described as steady, reliable, the one who remembered birthdays and kept everything running smoothly. She'd met Richard when she was 25, fresh out of grad school, working her first real job in risk management. He'd been charming back then, ambitious. He worked in sales, and he was good at it, good at reading people, good at knowing exactly what to say to make you feel seen. They got married within a year, built a life in the suburbs, had 2 kids, Connor and Maya, now 16 and 14. And somewhere along the way, Lauren had made a series of small sacrifices that didn't seem like sacrifices at the time. She turned down a promotion because Richard's job required more travel and someone needed to be home with the kids. She put her career on hold when his company expanded and he needed support during the transition. She became the person who managed everything at home so he could focus on becoming successful. And he did become successful. Vice President of Sales, 6-figure salary, respected in his industry. But success changed him, or maybe it just revealed who he'd always been underneath the charm. The late nights started about 5 years ago, work dinners that ran until midnight, weekend conferences that seemed to multiply. At first, Lauren believed him. Why wouldn't she? They'd built a life together, made vows, raised children. But then came the small cruelties, the way he'd correct her in front of friends, the way he'd sigh when she talked, like she was boring him, the way he stopped asking about her day, her thoughts, her feelings. She became furniture in her own home, useful, necessary, but invisible. The gaslighting was subtle at first. When she asked about his late nights, he'd accuse her of being paranoid. When she mentioned feeling distant, he'd tell her she was being dramatic. When she found a receipt for jewelry she'd never received, he explained it was for a client. Always an explanation, always just plausible enough to make her doubt her own instincts. But Lauren had spent 15 years in compliance. Her entire job had been identifying inconsistencies, following paper trails, trusting patterns over explanations. So when her gut kept screaming that something was wrong, she started paying attention differently, not emotionally, analytically. She noticed that his work trips coincided with gaps in their joint credit card statements, that he'd opened a separate account she only discovered by accident when mail came to the house, that he'd become obsessed with his appearance, joining a gym, buying expensive cologne, updating his wardrobe, classic signs, textbook really, but she didn't confront him, not yet, because Lauren understood something fundamental about truth and power. The person with the most information wins. So, she started gathering it, quietly, carefully. She made copies of financial statements, took screenshots of suspicious text messages when his phone was charging, noted dates and times and inconsistencies. She consulted with a divorce attorney, not to file, but to understand her rights, to know what she'd need if it came to that. And then, 6 weeks ago, she got confirmation. She'd borrowed Richard's laptop to print something when hers wasn't working. His email was open, and there it was, an entire folder of correspondence with someone named Jessica. Messages going back 18 months, hotel confirmations, photos, plans for a future that didn't include Lauren or the kids, except as obstacles to be managed. She'd sat there, her hands shaking, reading through months of betrayal. But what struck her most wasn't the affair itself, it was the contempt. The way Richard talked about her to this other woman, how he described Lauren as boring, controlling, past her prime, how he complained about being trapped, how he strategized about divorce in a way that would maximize his financial position and minimize hers. He'd written, and this line burned itself into Lauren's memory, that he was planning something special, a dinner where he could transition publicly, introduce Jessica to their social circle as his partner, show everyone he was moving on, and he wanted Lauren there to see it, to understand that he was done, that she'd been replaced. That's when Lauren stopped shaking and started planning, because Richard had made a critical mistake. He'd underestimated her, assumed her quietness meant weakness, her compliance meant defeat. But Lauren hadn't spent years in risk management without learning how to build a case, how to gather evidence, how to protect yourself before the other side even knows there's a fight coming. She reached out to someone from her old professional network, a man named Derek Walsh who'd left corporate compliance to do private investigation work. She explained the situation, showed him the evidence, asked what options she had. Derek listened carefully and then said something that changed her entire approach. Truth protects those who prepare, not revenge, not drama, just documentation. Clear, undeniable, legally sound documentation. Before we continue deeper into this story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Derek helped Lauren develop a strategy. They needed Richard to incriminate himself further, to create a clear record of intent, especially around finances, because Lauren had discovered that Richard had been quietly moving assets, transferring money to accounts she didn't have access to, undervaluing his stock options in ways that would matter during divorce proceedings. If she filed immediately, it would be her word against his. A messy he said she said battle, but if she waited, if she let him execute his plan, she could catch him in the act, document everything, build an airtight case. It was risky. It meant enduring more humiliation, more pretending, but it also meant protection for her, for the kids. For the future, she'd have to build without him. So when Richard announced 3 weeks ago that he wanted to take her to dinner at Marcello's, their favorite upscale Italian restaurant, Lauren knew exactly what he was doing. This was it. The public transition he'd written about. The performance. She said yes, smiled, acted grateful, and then she called Derek. They had 20 days to prepare. Derek would work at the restaurant that night as additional waitstaff. Marcello, the owner, was an old friend of Derek's and agreed to the arrangement when Derek explained he was helping document a case of financial fraud in a marriage. Derek would wear a discreet recording device, position himself to serve their table, capture audio of everything said. It wasn't about revenge, it was about evidence, about protecting Lauren's financial interests and making sure Richard couldn't rewrite history in court. Everything was legal, single-party consent, state. Lauren was part of the conversation being recorded, and it was all admissible. The night arrived. Lauren dressed carefully, not too formal, not too casual. Richard had told her to look nice because they were celebrating. She didn't ask what they were celebrating. She already knew. The drive to the restaurant was quiet. Richard seemed pleased with himself, kept checking his phone, smiling at messages. When they arrived, Lauren's heart was pounding, but her face remained calm. Years of compliance training had taught her how to maintain composure under pressure, how to listen without reacting, how to gather information while revealing nothing. They were seated at a corner table, intimate, visible to most of the restaurant, perfect for the kind of statement Richard wanted to make. Derek appeared almost immediately, introducing himself as their server for the evening. Richard barely glanced at him, just ordered wine and went back to his phone. But Derek caught Lauren's eye. The smallest nod. Everything was in place. Richard was animated, more energetic than Lauren had seen him in years. He talked about work, about a promotion that was coming through, about changes, fresh starts. His phone buzzed. He glanced at it and smiled. Then he said, casually, like it was no big deal, that someone would be joining them, a colleague, someone he wanted Lauren to meet. Lauren took a sip of water and asked who. Richard's smile widened. Just someone important to him, someone who'd been supportive during a difficult time. Lauren felt her stomach tighten but kept her expression neutral. So, this was how he was going to do it. Introduce his mistress as a colleague, make Lauren sit through it, force her to be polite while he flaunted his betrayal. She set her glass down carefully and said, "That's nice. I look forward to meeting her." Richard blinked. He'd expected a reaction, confusion, hurt, something. But Lauren just smiled and asked Derek to bring another wine glass for their guest. The first crack in Richard's confidence appeared. Just for a second, a flicker of uncertainty, but he recovered quickly, checked his phone again, texted someone. 10 minutes later, Jessica arrived. She was younger than Lauren, mid-30s, attractive in a polished, corporate way, confident stride, designer dress. She approached the table and Richard stood immediately, kissing her cheek, his hand lingering on her lower back. Lauren watched it all, noted the familiarity, the comfort, the ownership in the gesture. Jessica turned to Lauren with a practiced smile. "So nice to finally meet you. Richard talks about you all the time." Lauren stood, shook her hand. "The pleasure is mine. Please, sit." Richard looked almost giddy as Jessica sat down beside him. Derek appeared, poured wine, took a position nearby, his recording device capturing every word. The conversation started pleasantly enough, surface level. Richard asked Jessica about a client meeting. Jessica complimented the restaurant. Lauren commented on the wine. But then Richard started. Small at first. He mentioned that Lauren didn't get out much anymore, preferred staying home. Jessica laughed. "Oh, I'm the opposite. I love trying new places." Richard agreed. "Yes, you're adventurous. It's refreshing." The implication hung in the air. That Lauren was not adventurous, not refreshing, he continued. Jessica just got promoted, senior director now. Lauren used to work, but that was years ago. Lauren took a sip of wine. "I worked in compliance, risk management. It was fulfilling." Richard waved, dismissively. "Different world now. Everything's faster, more competitive. You have to be sharp." Again, the implication. That Lauren wasn't sharp, wasn't competitive, wasn't relevant. Jessica shifted uncomfortably. Clearly, this wasn't going the way she'd expected either. Maybe Richard had told her Lauren would be emotional, broken, easy to dismiss. But Lauren sat there calmly, making eye contact, nodding politely. It was unnerving. Richard pressed harder. He started talking about their marriage, how they'd grown apart, how people change, how sometimes you realize you want different things. Jessica touched his arm. Supportive, complicit. Lauren watched Derek move through the restaurant, refilling water at nearby tables, always within earshot. Then Richard said something that would later become Exhibit A in the divorce proceedings. He looked at Lauren and said, "I think we both know this marriage has been over for a long time. I've been trying to be respectful, trying to find the right way to move forward. But I need to be honest. Jessica and I are together, have been for over a year, and I think it's time we all acknowledged reality." He waited for Lauren's reaction, for tears, for anger, for something. Lauren set her fork down, folded her hands, looked him directly in the eye, and said, I appreciate your honesty, Richard. She turned to Jessica. And yours? Jessica looked confused. I'm sorry? Lauren smiled. It's okay, really. I've known for 6 weeks. The color drained from Richard's face. What? I've known about the affair, about the money you've been moving, about your plans to transition publicly tonight. I've known all of it. Richard's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Jessica looked between them, clearly lost. Lauren continued, her voice steady, calm, almost kind. I also know about the offshore account, the undervalued stock options, the way you've been positioning assets to hide them in the divorce, which, by the way, I'm filing for on Monday. If this story has your heart racing, comment, I'm still watching. Let's see who's truly following till the end. Richard's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: shock, denial, anger, and finally, a kind of desperate calculation. You're bluffing, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Lauren shook her head. I'm not. And before you start scrambling, you should know that everything you've said tonight is being recorded. Richard's eyes darted around the restaurant. By who? Lauren didn't answer. She didn't need to. Jessica stood abruptly. I think I should go. Lauren looked at her. You should know he told me you two met after we separated, that the marriage was already over, that I was fine with everything. Jessica's face went pale. He said you were separated? For 8 months. That you'd both moved on. You just hadn't made it official yet. Richard grabbed Jessica's wrist. Don't listen to her. She's lying. She's trying to turn you against me. But Jessica pulled her arm away. Are you separated? Richard stumbled over his words. It's complicated. We're living in the same house, but we're not really together. We haven't been together in years. Is that true? Jessica asked, looking at Lauren. Lauren met her gaze. We share a bedroom. We had breakfast together this morning. Our son asked Richard to help him with his college applications last night, and Richard said yes. We're not separated. We've never discussed separation. Until tonight, he's never mentioned divorce. Jessica's hands were shaking. Oh my God. Richard tried to salvage it. She's manipulating you. She's been controlling our entire marriage. This is exactly why I needed to get out. Lauren spoke quietly. Jessica, I'm not your enemy, and I'm not here to make a scene, but you deserve to know the truth. He's been lying to both of us. You should also know that the promotion he told you about, the one that was going to let you two go public and start your life together, it's not real. Richard's head snapped toward Lauren. What are you talking about? I spoke to someone in HR at your company, an old contact from my compliance days. There's no promotion coming. In fact, you're under review for expense account irregularities. Jessica stared at Richard. Is that true? Richard's jaw clenched. That's confidential company information. How dare you? Lauren remained calm. It's not confidential when it affects a divorce settlement. My attorney has subpoenaed your employment records. We'll know everything by next week. The tension at the table was suffocating. Other diners were starting to notice. Derek had positioned himself strategically, his recording device capturing every word while he appeared to simply be organizing menus at a nearby station. Richard leaned forward, his voice low and venomous. You think you're so smart, but you have no idea what you're doing. You're going to regret this. Lauren didn't flinch. Am I? Because from where I'm sitting, I have documentation of adultery, financial fraud, and now, in front of a witness, threatening behavior. She gestured subtly toward Derek, who was watching carefully. Richard followed her gaze and for the first time seemed to realize that the waiter had been hovering near their table all evening. His face went white. Who is he? Lauren took a sip of wine. Someone who's very good at his job. Richard stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is insane. You've lost your mind. I'm leaving. Go ahead, Lauren said. But you should know that my attorney will be in touch Monday morning. We'll be filing for divorce and requesting a full forensic audit of all marital assets. And if you try to move any more money before then, it will be considered dissipation of assets and will count against you in the settlement. Richard looked like he wanted to say something, do something, but he was trapped. Any move he made now would only make things worse. Jessica had already grabbed her purse and was walking toward the exit, her face a mixture of shock and humiliation. Richard pointed at Lauren, his finger shaking. You're going to pay for this. For what? Lauren asked. For protecting myself? For refusing to be humiliated quietly? For making sure our children's future is secure? Richard had no answer. He turned and stormed out of the restaurant, leaving Lauren sitting alone at the table. Derek approached quietly. "Are you okay?" Lauren nodded. "I'm fine. Did you get everything?" "Every word. It's time-stamped and backed up." Lauren exhaled slowly. "Then it's over." Derek pulled out a chair and sat down. The hard part might just be starting. Court, lawyers, dividing a life. Lauren looked at him. "The hard part was pretending everything was fine while my marriage crumbled. The hard part was doubting myself every time he called me paranoid. The hard part was over the moment I decided to trust what I knew instead of what he told me." What Lauren didn't tell Richard that night, what she'd kept as her final card, was that she'd also been documenting his parenting, or lack thereof. For the past 3 months, she'd kept a detailed record. Every missed soccer game, every forgotten parent-teacher conference, every time he promised the kids he'd be home for dinner and didn't show up, every dismissive comment he'd made about their activities or interests. She had it all: dates, times, witnesses, because she knew that when it came to custody, Richard would fight, not because he wanted to be with the kids, but because he'd see it as losing, as her winning, and he couldn't stand that. The next morning, Lauren sat Connor and Maya down in the living room. They knew something was wrong. Kids always know. She told them, gently but honestly, that their father and she were getting divorced, that it wasn't their fault, that both parents loved them, that some things were going to change, but they would get through it together. Connor, 16 and perceptive, asked, "Is it because of that woman, the one he brought to dinner last month when you were visiting Grandma?" Lauren's heart broke a little. "You met her?" He nodded. "Dad introduced her as a friend from work, but it didn't feel like just a friend." Maya, 14 and emotional, started crying. "Are we going to have to move? Are we going to be okay?" Lauren pulled them both close. "We're going to be okay. I promise. I've been preparing for this. We're protected. The house is in my name too. Your college funds are secure. Nothing about your daily lives has to change, except that Dad won't be living here." Over the next few weeks, the divorce proceedings began. Richard hired an aggressive attorney and tried to paint Lauren as unstable, controlling. He claimed she'd manipulated the situation at the restaurant, that she'd set him up. But Lauren's attorney, a sharp woman named Patricia Chen, had the recordings, the financial documents, the timeline of Richard's asset transfers, the emails planning the public humiliation, and then there was Derek's testimony. It turned out Derek wasn't just a former compliance officer turned private investigator. He was a licensed forensic accountant, and he'd been tracing Richard's money. Richard had moved over $200,000 into accounts Lauren wasn't supposed to know about. He'd undervalued his stock options by nearly 40%. He'd taken out a loan against his 401k and hidden it. He'd been planning to claim poverty in the divorce while sitting on hidden assets. But every transaction left a trail, and Derek had followed every single one. When Patricia presented the evidence in the preliminary hearing, Richard's attorney went pale. The judge was not amused. Richard tried to claim it was a misunderstanding, that he was protecting assets for the family. But the timestamps didn't lie. The transfers had accelerated after Lauren discovered the affair. After she started asking questions, it was clear, calculated dissipation. The judge ruled that all hidden assets would be returned to the marital estate immediately, and that Richard would be responsible for Lauren's legal fees given the bad faith he'd shown. Richard's face in that courtroom was something Lauren would remember forever. The moment he realized he'd lost, that his plan had backfired completely, that the woman he'd dismissed as past her prime had outmaneuvered him at every turn. Jessica never contacted Richard again. She'd sent Lauren a brief email a week after the restaurant incident, apologizing, saying she'd had no idea, that she felt used and stupid. Lauren wrote back, "Short, kind. You weren't stupid. You were lied to. That's on him, not you. Some wounds take time to heal, but the truth helps them heal clean." The divorce was finalized 4 months later. Lauren got primary custody, the house, and a settlement that reflected both the marital assets and Richard's attempt to hide them. Richard got visitation every other weekend, and the consequence of his choices. The kids adjusted. Slowly. Connor started talking to a therapist about his anger toward his father. Maya threw herself into art, processing her feelings through painting, and Lauren started rebuilding, not just her life, but herself. She'd spent so many years being wife, mother, supporter, that she'd forgotten what it felt like to just be Lauren. She reconnected with old colleagues, started consulting part-time, using her compliance expertise to help small businesses. She joined a book club, took a pottery class, laughed with friends, and slowly, the weight she'd been carrying for years lifted. She hadn't realized how heavy it had been until it was gone. 6 months after the divorce was final, Lauren was having coffee with her sister, Andrea, who asked the question everyone seemed to want to know. "Do you regret how you handled it? The dinner? The recording? All of it?" Lauren thought about it, stirred her coffee, then shook her head. "No. If I'd confronted him privately, he would have denied everything. Gaslighted me more, made me question myself. If I'd just filed for divorce without evidence, it would have been years of fighting. But this way, the truth was undeniable. He couldn't rewrite history because it was all documented." Andrea smiled. "You're kind of a genius. You know that?" Lauren laughed. "I'm just someone who paid attention, who trusted herself when everyone was telling her not to." There's a lesson in Lauren's story that goes beyond divorce and betrayal. It's about the quiet power of preparation, the strength that comes not from confrontation, but from clarity. We live in a culture that celebrates loud justice, public call-outs, dramatic confrontations, and sometimes those are necessary. But sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is gather the truth quietly, build your case carefully, and act from a position of knowledge rather than emotion. Lauren could have screamed at Richard the night she found those emails, could have thrown his things out on the lawn, could have called Jessica and said terrible things. But none of that would have protected her. None of that would have secured her children's future or ensured she got a fair settlement. The truth is, people who are willing to betray you are often also willing to lie about you. And in court, in public, in the aftermath, lies can be convincing if you don't have facts to counter them. Lauren understood that. She'd spent her career in compliance, understanding that documentation beats emotion every time, that patterns matter more than explanations, that the person with the clearest evidence wins, and she applied that same logic to the most painful situation of her life. Think about your own life for a moment. Are there situations where you're accepting explanations that don't match patterns, where you're being told you're paranoid or oversensitive when your instincts are screaming something's wrong? Are you prioritizing keeping the peace over protecting yourself? These are hard questions, because sometimes the truth is inconvenient. Sometimes it means admitting that the life you built isn't what you thought it was. Sometimes it means starting over. But here's what Lauren learned and what she'd want you to know. Starting over from a foundation of truth is better than staying in a structure built on lies. Even if it's scary, even if it's hard, even if everyone tells you to just work it out, to forgive, to move on. Some things aren't meant to be worked out. Some betrayals are too fundamental. And recognizing that isn't failure. It's wisdom. A year after the divorce, Lauren ran into Richard at Connor's soccer game. It was awkward, brief. He looked older, tired. He'd tried to make things work with Jessica after everything, but apparently she'd moved on, found someone else, someone honest. He'd also lost his job. The expense account investigation had led to termination. He was working for a smaller company now, making less, living in a one-bedroom apartment. Lauren didn't feel happy about it, but she didn't feel sorry for him either. She felt nothing, which, she realized, was exactly how it should be. Indifference was freedom. After the game, Connor approached her. "Dad asked if I wanted to get dinner with him tonight. Do I have to go?" Lauren knelt down to his level. "You don't have to do anything you're not ready for. But I also don't want you to close that door forever. He's still your father. He made terrible choices, and he hurt our family. But that's between him and me. Your relationship with him is yours." Connor nodded slowly. "I'm not ready yet." "Okay, then tell him that. And when you are ready, you can reach out." Connor hugged her. "Thanks, Mum, for everything, for not making us pick sides, for being honest with us, for being strong." Lauren held him tight. "You're stronger than you know, buddy. Both you and your sister. You're going to be okay." And they were. All three of them. Different than before. Changed, but okay. Maya started selling her art online. Small pieces at first, then larger commissions. She had talent, real talent, and the pain she'd processed through painting had given her work depth. Connor got accepted to his first-choice college with a partial scholarship. He'd written his admissions essay about resilience, about watching his mother navigate the hardest period of her life with grace and strategy, about learning that strength isn't always loud. The admissions officer later told him it was one of the most mature essays they'd received that year. And Lauren, she kept building, kept growing. She even started dating again, nothing serious. Just coffee with interesting people, conversations that reminded her what it felt like to be seen. One evening, she was having dinner with Andrea again, and her sister asked, "If you could go back and change anything, would you?" Lauren thought about it. The years of loneliness, the gaslighting, the betrayal, the humiliation Richard had planned for her. And then she thought about who she'd become, the business she was building, the relationship she had with her kids, the peace she felt waking up in a home that was truly hers. "No," she said finally, "because all of it taught me something I needed to learn, that I'm stronger than I thought, that I can trust myself, that I don't need someone else to validate my worth." Andrea raised her glass. To strength, to truth, to new beginnings. Lauren clinked her glass against her sister's, to knowing when to stay and when to walk away, and to having the courage to do both. So let me ask you something. If you were in Lauren's position, what would you have done? Would you have confronted Richard immediately when you found the emails? Would you have planned like she did? Or would you have tried to save the marriage? There's no right answer. Every situation is different. Every person's boundaries are their own. But I think Lauren's story raises important questions about how we handle betrayal, about whether quiet strength is more effective than loud confrontation, about whether gathering truth is more powerful than demanding explanations. Some people will say she was calculated, that she manipulated the situation. But was she? Or was she simply protecting herself from someone who'd already decided to hurt her? Think about the people in this story. Richard, who valued control over honesty. Jessica, who was lied to just as much as Lauren was. The kids, caught in the middle of their father's choices. And Lauren, who chose documentation over drama. Who would you have empathy for? Who do you think handled things well? Who do you think made mistakes? Drop a comment. Share your perspective. Because these stories aren't just entertainment. They're mirrors. They reflect the choices we all face when relationships break down, when trust is violated, when we have to decide between what's easy and what's right. And if you think this story was intense, if it made you think, made you feel something, then you're exactly who these videos are for. People who want substance, who appreciate stories that respect real emotions and real complexity. Don't let this be our last conversation. If this story moved you in any way, whether it made you reflect, feel stronger, or see something differently, don't let this be our last story together. Subscribe and come back for the next one. You're always welcome here.